October 14th, 1943. 2:47 p.m. Somewhere over Schweinfurt, Germany, Oberleutnant Werner Düring banks his Bf-109 fighter into a climbing turn, his engine screaming as he claws for altitude. Below him, a formation of American B-17 flying fortresses is making its bomb run over the ball-bearing factories. He's out of ammunition. 20 minutes of combat, attacking the formation on its inbound leg, making firing passes through walls of defensive machine gun fire, watching two of his squadron mates go down in flames. His guns are empty, but he can't resist circling back to watch the bombing. Through his canopy, Düring sees the bomb bay doors opening on dozens of B-17s, small black shapes tumbling earthward. And then the explosions begin, everywhere. Farmland to the south erupts in gouts of earth and smoke. A forest to the west suddenly sports a line of craters marching through the trees. Residential streets on the city's outskirts vanish in clouds of dust and debris. The ball-bearing factories themselves. 2 hits, maybe 3, out of hundreds of bombs. Düring's radio crackles with commentary from other German pilots still in the area. Did they bring maps? I think they're aiming for the cows. Precision bombing, they call it. Laughter. Actual laughter from men who've just been through a brutal air battle. Düring keys his mic. If this is precision, I'd hate to see them try to miss. More laughter. He watches the American formation wheel away, heading for home. The bombers took casualties. He saw at least 6 go down, maybe more. Brave men. He respects that. Flying into Germany's teeth, taking losses that would break most air forces. But accurate, not even close. He points his fighter toward his airfield and throttles up. When he lands 20 minutes later, the debriefing continues the theme. Terrorangriff, one of the intelligence officers mutters. Terror attack. Not because the Americans are intentionally targeting civilians, they're clearly trying to hit the factories. They're just catastrophically bad at it. The numbers will bear this out. Of the 229 B-17s that bombed Schweinfurt that day, most missed by hundreds of yards. The ball-bearing plants took damage enough to disrupt production for a while, but nothing close to what the Americans hoped for. And the cost, 60 bombers lost, 60. That's 600 dead or captured airmen for a raid that barely scratched its intended targets. Düring pulls off his flight gear and heads to the mess hall. The consensus among the pilots is clear. American bombing is nothing to worry about. Sure, they're sending more bombers every month. Yes, the sheer weight of explosives falling on Germany is increasing. But precision strikes against German war production? A fantasy. What Düring doesn't know, what none of them know, is that this represents the low point, the nadir of American bombing accuracy. The moment of maximum German confidence. It won't last. Let's talk about the gap between promise and reality. Before the war, American military planners sold precision bombing with almost religious fervor. The Norden Bombsight, they claimed, could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 30,000 feet. The phrase appeared in newspapers, in recruiting materials, in congressional testimony. It was brilliant marketing. It was also complete nonsense. The Norden Bombsight was real. That part wasn't a lie. It was a mechanical marvel, an analog computer built with precision-machined gears, gyroscopes, mirrors, and motors. Each sight cost about $8,000 in 1940s dollars, roughly equivalent to 2 Cadillacs or a nice house in many American cities. The device was classified top secret. Bombardiers who trained on the Norden took oaths never to reveal its secrets. Armed guards escorted the sights whenever they moved between storage and aircraft. Some B-17 crews carried thermite grenades with specific orders. If the aircraft was going down over enemy territory, destroy the Norden. Burn it. Don't let the Germans capture one intact. The secrecy bred mystique. The mystique bred inflated expectations. And then the war started. August 17, 1942. The 8th Air Force flies its first bombing mission against occupied Europe, a raid on railway yards in Rouen, France. 12 B-17s participate. They claim hits on the target. The results? Modest at best, but it's a start. Over the following months, missions increase in frequency and ambition. Targets in France, targets in the Low Countries, and finally targets in Germany itself. The statistics are devastating. Through the end of 1943, 8th Air Force bombing accuracy averages 1,200 feet circular error. Think about what that means. The bombardier aims at a specific aiming point, usually the center of a factory complex. The bomb lands on average 1,200 feet away from that point. That's nearly a quarter of a mile. Only 16% of bombs fall within 1,000 feet of the aiming point. 16%. Said another way, 84 out of every 100 bombers completely miss their targets. The bombs land somewhere, in streets, in fields, in residential neighborhoods, but not where intended. Let's look at a specific example. Early 1943, a major raid against German submarine pens in France. Over 200 bombers participate. The submarine pens are massive reinforced concrete structures, fortresses really. The Germans built them with roofs 15 feet thick specifically to withstand bombing. Post-mission reconnaissance photos tell the story. Bomb craters pockmark the surrounding area. The nearby French town takes heavy damage. Dozens of buildings destroyed, civilian casualties mounting. The submarine pens themselves? Untouched. Not because the concrete was too strong, though it was, but because almost no bombs hit them. The bombardiers aimed at the pens. The bombs landed everywhere else. Mission assessment. Satisfactory results. That's military bureaucracy for "we tried." German intelligence officers study the reconnaissance photos and reach their own conclusions. Enemy bombing accuracy remains extremely poor. Individual target complexes face minimal threat. The real danger is simply the growing number of bombers. Eventually, with enough bombs, purely random chance will cause damage. But precision strikes? Surgical destruction of specific industrial targets? The Germans aren't worried. A Luftwaffe analysis from early 1943 states this explicitly. Enemy precision bombing poses no serious threat to war production. Strategic vulnerability lies not in American accuracy, but in their numerical superiority. Translation: we're not afraid of where their bombs land. We're afraid of how many bombs they have. This represents the German perspective in 1942 and early 1943. American bombers are a nuisance, sometimes a deadly nuisance when they get lucky or when sheer volume overwhelms defenses. But the vaunted pickle barrel accuracy? A propaganda myth. The Germans aren't mocking American courage. The airmen flying into flak and fighters earn grudging respect. They're mocking American claims of precision. And to be fair, the mockery is justified by the evidence. What the Germans don't understand yet is why the accuracy is so poor. And more importantly, they don't anticipate what's coming. The Americans are learning, adapting, improving. The students are going to become masters, but first we need to understand the device at the center of this story. The Norden Bombsight. What it was, how it worked, and why reality diverged so catastrophically from theory. Carl L. Norden was a perfectionist. Born in the Netherlands, trained as an engineer, he emigrated to the United States and found work with the U.S. Navy in the 1920s. His assignment: solve the problem of accurate bombing from aircraft. At the time, bombing was crude. Pilots aimed by eye, released bombs manually, and hoped for the best. Accuracy depended entirely on pilot skill, intuition, and luck. Results were accordingly poor. Norden approached the problem with engineer's logic. Bombing, he recognized, was a ballistics problem. A falling bomb follows a predictable trajectory determined by physics: altitude, airspeed, wind, air density, bomb weight, bomb shape. If you could measure all those variables and compute the trajectory, you could hit your target. The challenge was building a machine that could perform those calculations in real time, in an aircraft bouncing through turbulent air while being shot at. Norden spent years developing his solution. The result was an analog computer, a mechanical calculating device that used precisely machined gears, gyroscopes, mirrors, and electric motors to solve ballistic equations. Here's how it worked. The bombardier sat in the nose of the aircraft, hunched over the Norden sight. He began by leveling the sight's internal gyroscopes using bubble levels. Absolutely critical, because even 1 degree of tilt could throw the calculations off by hundreds of feet. Next, he input the variables: bombing altitude, airspeed, air temperature, barometric pressure, and the ballistic characteristics of the specific bombs being carried. These inputs adjusted the speed of an internal disk that synchronized with the bomb's fall time. The disk would rotate exactly 88.5 times during the time required for the bomb to fall to Earth. Then came the skilled part: killing the drift. The bombardier peered through a telescopic sight, magnification 2.2 power, field of view 18 degrees, with crosshairs etched on the lens. The crosshairs intersected the target far below. As the aircraft flew toward the target, wind pushed the aircraft off course, drift. The bombardier used control knobs to adjust the aircraft's heading, coordinating with the pilot, or in later models, directly controlling the autopilot. His goal: make the target appear to float straight down the vertical crosshair. When drift was killed, the aircraft was flying directly into the wind. Next, killing the rate. Another adjustment, synchronizing the movement of the sight's internal mirror with the aircraft's speed over the ground. When done correctly, the target appeared motionless in the sight, frozen on the crosshairs despite the aircraft traveling at 180 miles per hour. Final step, the displacement knob, which adjusted the sight to account for the bomb's trajectory. The bombardier placed the target precisely on the horizontal crosshair, and then he waited. The Norden's internal mechanisms calculated the exact release point. When that point arrived, the bombsight triggered an intervalometer, an automatic release mechanism that dropped bombs in sequence at precise intervals. Bombs away. In theory, this system was incredibly accurate. Pre-war specifications called for 2.5 mils accuracy. Technical readers can do the math. For everyone else, that translates to a circular error of 50 feet when bombing from 20,000 feet altitude. 50 feet. That's genuinely remarkable for mechanical analog computation. Manufacturing the Norden required extraordinary precision. Each bearing was individually hand-polished to fit its bearing seat. Tolerances were measured in thousandths of an inch. The Norden company performed 84 separate tests on each anti-friction ball bearing before accepting it for use. Before the war, production was slow, meticulous, quality-controlled. Each bomb site was tested extensively before delivery to the military. The device worked. In peacetime testing, under ideal conditions with expert bombardiers and no one shooting at them. Norden sights achieved impressive accuracy. Norden himself believed his invention would change warfare, make it more humane, paradoxically. With sufficient accuracy, he argued, bombers could strike specific military and industrial targets while sparing civilians. Precision bombing would replace indiscriminate city burning. Wars could be won through surgical strikes against enemy war production, not through terror, attacks against populations. It was an appealing vision, a moral argument for air power. The U.S. military agreed. The Norden became the centerpiece of American strategic bombing doctrine, daylight precision bombing of industrial choke points. That was the plan. Find the critical nodes in the enemy's war economy, ball-bearing factories, oil refineries, aircraft plants, and destroy them with overwhelming precision. But theory and practice are different things. Let's talk about why Göring and his fellow German pilots were laughing. The gap between Norden's promised 50-foot accuracy and the actual 200-foot reality had multiple causes. Some were predictable. Others emerged only under combat conditions. Start with the human factor. Pre-war bombardier training took 12 months or more. The washout rate was high. Only the most skilled trainees made it through. These men practiced endlessly with the Norden, learning to kill drift and rate instinctively, developing the touch required to keep a target frozen on the crosshairs. Then the war started. Suddenly, the Army Air Forces needed thousands of bombardiers, not dozens. Training time compressed to 3 or 4 months. Standards dropped. Men graduated and shipped overseas with inadequate preparation. Operating the Norden under ideal conditions was difficult. Under combat conditions, it became exponentially harder. Yet many wartime bombardiers never mastered the basics. Second problem. Altitude. American pre-war bombing doctrine assumed attacks from 10,000 to 15,000 feet. At those altitudes, the Norden performed well. The variables were manageable. Wind shear was minimal, temperature gradients were moderate, atmospheric density was relatively constant. Then German flak forced American bombers higher. By 1943, formations were flying at 20,000 to 27,000 feet. Some missions went even higher. Every additional 100 feet of altitude added 6.1 feet of circular error. The increase was linear and unavoidable. More altitude meant more atmospheric variables, more distance for the bomb to be affected by wind, more potential for deviation. From 27,000 feet, the challenges became severe. Wind shear at different altitudes pushed bombs off course. Temperature variations affected air density. Crews breathing pure oxygen at high altitude suffered from hypoxia, reduced mental acuity, slower reactions, degraded judgment. The bombardier trying to keep a target frozen on his crosshairs while struggling with oxygen deprivation, freezing temperatures, and his aircraft bouncing through flak. The 50-foot accuracy spec was a fantasy. Third problem, the combat environment. German flak batteries didn't wait politely for American bombardiers to complete their calculations. They filled the sky with exploding steel. Each flak burst added turbulence, shaking the aircraft, disrupting the bombardier's delicate adjustments. Statistical analysis later proved each active flak gun added an average of 4.5 feet of circular error. Heavy flak concentrations, Schweinfurt had 23 heavy batteries plus light flak, could add hundreds of feet of error. Smoke screens were worse. Germans learned to blanket important targets with smoke generators. A smoke screen added an average of 281 feet of error, either because bombardiers couldn't see their targets clearly or because they guessed at aiming points. Then there was formation bombing. American doctrine called for bomber formations of 18 to 21 aircraft flying tight patterns. The lead bombardier, supposedly the most skilled man in the formation, aimed and released. Everyone else watched the lead aircraft and released when they saw its bombs drop. If the lead bombardier nailed his target, the formation achieved concentrated hits. If the lead bombardier missed by 500 feet, every aircraft in the formation missed by roughly 500 feet. One man's error multiplied 18 times. Fourth problem, mass production. In December 1943, Wright Field, the Army Air Force's testing center, evaluated 200 Norden bombsights fresh from the factories. Their conclusion was damning. These sights were inferior to those produced 2 years earlier. Why? Because war demands mass production, and mass production requires compromises. Before the war, the Norden Company produced bombsights slowly, with master craftsmen hand-fitting components. When war came, demand exploded. The military needed thousands of Nordens immediately. 5 different companies began manufacturing the sights. Norden itself, plus Remington Rand, Burroughs, Lucas Herald, and Victor Adding Machine Company. Production rates increased dramatically. Quality control suffered. Manufacturing tolerances loosened. Where pre-war Nordens achieved 2.5 mils inherent accuracy, wartime production averaged 14 mils. That's 5.6 times worse. Translation: a wartime Norden had an inherent circular error of 280 feet from 20,000 feet altitude, not 50 feet. And that's before accounting for human error, altitude effects, combat environment, or weather. Speaking of weather, the final insurmountable problem. The Norden was an optical sight. It required visual contact with the target. The bombardier needed to see what he was aiming at. Europe's weather was predominantly cloudy. Statistical analysis from 1944 shows the problem clearly. Between January and March, there were 91 total days. Only 14 were clear enough for visual bombing. 14 out of 91. The rest? Clouds. Overcast, weather systems rolling in from the Atlantic and blanketing the continent. When clouds obscured targets, American bombers had 2 choices: abort the mission and return home with their bombs, or attack blind using radar. Early radar bombing was even less accurate than visual bombing, often by factors of 10. All these factors combined to produce the dismal accuracy that prompted German laughter. It wasn't that the Norden was a bad device. It was that the operational environment overwhelmed its capabilities. The Americans needed to adapt, change tactics, improve training, find ways to work around the limitations. Fortunately, they had just the man for that job. Curtis Emerson LeMay didn't care if people liked him. He cared if they survived. In 1943, LeMay commanded the 305th Bomb Group in England. He was young for a commander, not yet 38, and he had a reputation. Brilliant tactician, ruthless disciplinarian, the kind of officer who analyzed every problem systematically and implemented solutions regardless of whether they were popular. His crews called him Iron Ass. It wasn't affectionate. LeMay looked at the bombing accuracy problem and saw multiple failure points. Poor formation discipline, inadequate training, evasive maneuvers during bomb runs that destroyed the bombardier's carefully synchronized sight picture. He started fixing problems. First, formation flying. LeMay developed what became known as the combat box, a tight defensive formation that allowed bombers to mass their defensive firepower against attacking fighters. But the combat box had another benefit. It concentrated bombs on target. Instead of each aircraft attacking independently, formations attacked as units. The best bombardiers flew in lead positions. The rest of the formation followed the lead aircraft's bomb release. This required precise flying. Maintaining exact position relative to the lead aircraft while flying at 180 miles per hour at 25,000 feet in freezing temperatures with fighters attacking and flak exploding around you? Not easy. LeMay drilled his crews endlessly. Formation practice, again and again. His men hated it. They were exhausted from combat missions, terrified by mounting casualties, and now their commander wanted them to fly practice formations. LeMay didn't care. Fly the formations, get it right. Your survival depends on it. It worked. LeMay's 305th Bomb Group achieved better accuracy than other groups. Not miraculous accuracy, they still faced all the same limitations, but measurably better. Second, the straight and level bomb run. Previous doctrine called for evasive maneuvers during the final approach to target. Jink left, jink right, vary altitude, make yourself a harder target for flak. Standard procedure, seemingly sensible. LeMay recognized this destroyed bombing accuracy. Every evasive maneuver disrupted the bombardier's synchronization. The Norden required a stable platform. Jinking around meant starting the sighting process over again and again. So LeMay issued a controversial order. On the bomb run, fly straight and level. No evasion, no jinking. Give the bombardier a steady platform. His crews thought he'd lost his mind. Fly straight and level through a flak barrage. That's suicide. Sitting ducks. LeMay's response was coldly logical. Yes, you'll take more flak hits, but you'll hit your targets. And hitting targets means fewer return missions. Fewer missions means better survival odds overall. It was brutal mathematics. Some crews would take fatal flak hits they might have dodged, but the group as a whole would be more effective, would accomplish missions faster, would spend less time over heavily defended targets. LeMay implemented the straight and level requirement. Accuracy improved dramatically. Third, training innovations. LeMay instituted blind takeoff practice. On foggy mornings when other groups sat on the ground waiting for weather to clear, LeMay's crews practiced instrument takeoffs. They hated it, another training exercise when they were already exhausted. But when the August 17, 1943 Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission came around, LeMay's group was the only one that could take off in the fog. The other groups delayed for hours, which destroyed the mission's timing and led to higher casualties. LeMay ran bombardier competitions. Best circular error won prizes. He integrated the new C-1 autopilot system with the Norden sight, improving stabilization. He analyzed every mission in detail, identifying errors, implementing corrections. By early 1944, units adopting LeMay's tactics were significantly outperforming those that didn't. The difference was measurable in bomb damage assessment photos. LeMay's groups hit their targets more often. The improvement wasn't miraculous. They still faced weather problems, altitude challenges, equipment limitations. But from an average of 16% of bombs within 1,000 feet, LeMay's tactics pushed that number to 25%, then 30%. The curve was trending upward. LeMay's tactical innovations were crucial, but other factors also drove improvement. The C-1 autopilot integration made a significant difference. Earlier autopilots were crude, barely adequate for straight and level flight, prone to overcorrection and oscillation. The C-1 was smoother, more stable, with better gyroscopic control. When connected to the Norden, the C-1 gave bombardiers direct control of the aircraft during the bomb run. Turn knobs on the Norden and the autopilot smoothly adjusted the aircraft's heading. The integration reduced lag, improved responsiveness, and maintained steadier platforms. Accuracy tripled in the first months after C-1 adoption. That's not an exaggeration. Statistical analysis from 8th Air Force Operations Research showed a threefold improvement just from better autopilot integration. Operational procedures evolved. Instead of trying to get every bomber over the target simultaneously, which created chaos, smoke, debris, and bombs obscuring later formations' views, missions extended time over target. First group bombs wait for smoke to clear, second group bombs wait again, third group bombs. This reduced accuracy for trailing groups substantially. The first three groups over target achieved twice the hit rate of subsequent groups, but that was still better than everyone bombing blind through smoke and dust. Target selection improved. Intelligence officers got better at identifying industrial choke points and providing accurate target folders. Photo reconnaissance improved, giving bombardiers better images of what they were aiming at. Weather forecasting improved, allowing mission planners to attack only when conditions favored visual bombing. And perhaps most importantly, experience accumulated. Crews that survived missions learned. They learned to identify targets faster, to operate the Norden more efficiently, to maintain formation discipline under fire. The veterans mentored the replacements. Institutional knowledge built up. By mid-1944, the average experience level of American bomber crews was substantially higher than in 1943. The learning curve was steep, paid for in blood and losses, but real. But the biggest game changer was something else entirely. Winter 1943 and 1944. P-51 Mustang fighters begin escorting bomber formations all the way to targets deep in Germany. This changes everything. Previously, American heavy bombers flew unescorted once they penetrated past the range of shorter-legged fighters. The Luftwaffe pounced on these undefended formations, attacking in waves, forcing bombers into evasive maneuvers that destroyed bombing accuracy. The P-51 had the range to escort bombers to Berlin and back, and it could fight, outperforming German fighters in speed, climb rate, and maneuverability at the altitudes where bomber escort combat occurred. Suddenly, German fighters couldn't attack with impunity. They faced American fighters that could chase them down and kill them. Luftwaffe losses mounted catastrophically. By spring 1944, German fighter strength was declining rapidly. Fewer fighter attacks meant less evasive maneuvering. Less maneuvering meant better bombing accuracy. The relationship was direct and measurable. Flak remained dangerous. We'll come back to that. But flak was predictable. Flak concentrations were plotted on maps. Pilots could prepare mentally for flak zones. It was terrifying but manageable. Fighter attacks were chaotic, unpredictable, demanded immediate violent maneuvers. Fighter attacks destroyed formation integrity and bombing accuracy far more than flak. With fighters increasingly neutralized, American formations could focus on their bombing runs. Fly steady, maintain formation. Let the bombardiers work. The oil campaign in mid-1944 demonstrated the changing dynamics. German synthetic oil plants became priority targets, concentrated industrial complexes relatively easy to locate, perfect for precision bombing. Example, the Luna synthetic oil plant near Merseburg, Germany. Massive facility heavily defended with 506 anti-aircraft guns. The target received 18 American day attacks and 4 British night attacks. Total bombs dropped 85,074. Only 10% landed inside the plant's perimeter fence. That sounds terrible, and by pre-war standards it was. 90% of bombs missed. But that 10%, 8507 bombs, was enough. The plant was huge, 757 acres, but 10% of 85,000 bombs is devastating. Repeated attacks prevented repairs. Production cratered. German Armaments Minister Albert Speer later testified the oil campaign was crippling. By late 1944, fuel shortages were grounding Luftwaffe aircraft, limiting tank operations, restricting naval movements. Germany was being strangled. The accuracy still wasn't surgical. It was overwhelming force, sustained over time, gradually battering targets into rubble. But it was working, and the accuracy numbers kept improving. January 1944, average accuracy climbs to 30% within 1,000 feet. Summer 1944, 35 to 40%. Fall 1944, 40 to 45%. The trend is undeniable. The Americans are getting better. February 1945, American bomber formations cross into German airspace, flying at an average altitude of 16,500 feet, substantially lower than the 24,500 feet averaged earlier in the war. Why lower? Because they can. German fighter strength has collapsed. Fuel shortages, ground aircraft. Experienced pilots are dead or captured. The Luftwaffe can barely contest American air superiority. Lower altitude means better accuracy. The variables that plagued high-altitude bombing, wind shear, temperature gradients, extended bomb fall time, are reduced, and the accuracy statistics reflect this. February 1945, 49.3% of bombs fall within 1,000 feet of their aiming points. Almost half. 3 times better than 1943. The improvement is staggering. April 1945, 59% within 1,000 feet. More than half. The majority. 3 bombs out of 5 hitting within the target zone. Transportation targets. Rail marshalling yards, bridge approaches, road junctions get plastered with devastating precision. Close air support missions achieve 40 to 50% accuracy supporting ground forces. Oil refineries are systematically obliterated. Industrial production collapses under sustained pressure. Imagine your Oberleutnant Werner Doering, the Bf-109 pilot who laughed in October 1943. If he survived to spring 1945, many haven't. His perspective has changed completely. He watches American formations approach. Their formations are tight, professional, overwhelming. No evasive maneuvers needed because there are no German fighters rising to intercept. Fuel is too scarce. Pilots are too inexperienced. Orders are to preserve aircraft for the defense of the Reich against Soviet ground forces. The Americans fly straight to their targets. The bombs fall with mechanical precision. Explosions ripple across factories, rail yards, fuel depots. The laughter has stopped. Let's talk about what 59% accuracy within 1,000 feet actually means. By modern standards, GPS-guided munitions landing within meters of their targets, it sounds crude. By 1945 standards, it was devastating. A circle with a 1,000-foot radius encompasses about 72 acres. Most industrial complexes occupied less than 100 acres. When a formation of 36 B-17s attacked a target and 59% of their bombs fell within that 72-acre circle, the target zone was saturated. Consider the weight of effort. From 1942 through 1945, American forces dropped 7,431,001 bombs on German targets. 7,431,001. The inventory included 158 4,500-pound bombs, 48 M575 2,000-pound bombs, 564 969 1,000-pound bombs, 3 Thou 89 916 500-pound bombs, 1 Thou 55 289 250-pound bombs, 1 520 209 100-pound bombs, plus 1 Thou 151,885 incendiary bombs. Total cost, $30 billion in 1945 currency, hundreds of billions in modern terms. The Luna synthetic oil plant provides a case study in the cumulative effect. 18 American day attacks, 4 British night attacks, 85,074 total bombs, only 10% hitting inside the fence. But those 8,507 bombs that did hit? Each attack caused damage. Repair crews would work frantically to restore production. Then another raid would hit, destroying the repairs. Then another. Then another. The plant produced at 28% normal capacity after 9 strikes. Still functional, but crippled. German oil production couldn't sustain operations. The war machine ground down from fuel starvation. No single attack permanently destroyed Luna. But sustained attacks prevented recovery. That was the secret. Persistence. The Americans could sustain losses, replace aircraft, train new crews, and return tomorrow. The Germans couldn't match that industrial capacity. Did strategic bombing win the war? That debate continues. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted immediately after the war, reached nuanced conclusions. No single industry was permanently knocked out by a single attack, but cumulative damage was severe. Albert Speer, Germany's armaments minister, estimated the bombing campaign cost Germany 10,000 heavy guns, 6,000 tanks, and 20,000 anti-aircraft guns that could have been used on the Eastern Front. Resources diverted to air defense, repair work, dispersal of industry, all came at the expense of frontline combat power. Speer called it Germany's greatest lost battle. The human cost was staggering. American casualties in the European air war exceeded 160,000. Killed, wounded, missing, captured. For bomber crews, survival odds improved dramatically by late 1944 compared to the dark days of 1943. But the risks never disappeared. Flak remained deadly through the last missions. German anti-aircraft gunners fought on, even when fuel shortages grounded fighters, even when the ground war was clearly lost. They fired at American formations until they ran out of ammunition or Allied ground forces overran their positions. The average bomber lifespan early in the war was 40 flying hours, approximately 5 to 7 missions. By 1945, those odds had improved substantially, but every mission remained a gamble with death. One pilot wrote, "I feared flak more than I feared fighters. At least with fighters you could shoot back." The black puffs, the shrapnel rattling through the fuselage, the sudden violent death when a shell detonated in the cockpit. Flak killed indiscriminately and gave no warning. Through it all, the bombardiers hunched over their Norden sights, killing drift, killing rate, synchronizing their crosshairs with targets far below. Doing the technical work of precision bombing while their aircraft shook from flak concussions and their friends died around them. And gradually, persistently, they got better. So what was the Norden Bombsight really? Not the miracle weapon of pre-war propaganda. Not the magical pickle barrel precision device that newspapers claimed could revolutionize warfare. But also not a failure, not a fraud, not a waste of $30 billion. The Norden was the most accurate bombing system of World War II. Better than German equivalents, the Germans never developed anything comparable. Better than British systems, the RAF relied on less sophisticated sights and radar bombing. Better than Japanese targeting technology. Good enough when used correctly with trained crews in favorable conditions with supporting tactics to devastate German war production. The irony is that Norden's original vision, surgical strikes, precision targeting, reduced civilian casualties, was compromised by operational realities. The precision got better, but precision remained relative. American bombing in 1945 was overwhelmingly accurate by 1943 standards. It was still area bombing by modern standards. The moral dream of bloodless, clean surgical warfare? That remained a dream. What actually changed the equation wasn't just the Norden. It was the system. Tactics, training, numerical superiority, air superiority, sustained campaigns, industrial capacity. The Norden was one component of a larger machine. Curtis LeMay's formation tactics mattered. P-51 escort fighters mattered. The ability to replace losses and return tomorrow mattered. The accumulation of experience mattered. Lower altitudes made possible by air superiority mattered. Strip away any single component and the system fails. The Norden by itself, without the supporting structure, would have achieved little. But within that structure, the Norden performed, from 16% accuracy in 1943 to 59% in 1945. That's not incremental improvement. That's transformation. After the war, the Norden was declassified, the top-secret device that bombardiers swore oaths to protect. By the early 1950s, you could read detailed descriptions in public reports. The mystique evaporated. Surplus Norden Bombsights sold for $24.50 at military surplus stores. $24.50 for a device that cost $8,000 to manufacture. That was once classified top secret. That was central to America's strategic bombing campaign. The Cold War brought jet bombers, radar bombing systems, and eventually guided missiles. The Norden became obsolete almost overnight. Mechanical analog computation couldn't compete with emerging electronics. The pickle barrel mythology faded into history. Today, collectors pay $8,000 or more for working Norden bombsights. Not for their military value, they have none, but for their historical significance. Museum pieces, artifacts of a specific moment in technological warfare when mechanical engineering reached its apex before electronics rendered it obsolete. The debate over strategic bombing continues. Historians argue about effectiveness, morality, necessity. Did bombing shorten the war? How much? Was the cost in lives and resources justified? The arguments are complex, nuanced, and probably unanswerable with certainty. War doesn't provide controlled experiments. But one thing is indisputable. German mockery of American bombing accuracy in 1943 was justified by the statistics. And by 1945, that mockery had transformed into something else. Not respect, exactly. The Germans were too busy losing the war to feel much respect for anything. But recognition, acknowledgement that the students had become masters. The final assessment belongs to the men who experienced both sides of the transformation. Post-war interviews with German veterans reveal a consistent theme. Initially, they weren't worried about American precision bombing. The accuracy was poor, the effect minimal. Their real concerns were numerical superiority and the grinding attrition of Germany's defenses. But as the war progressed, their assessment changed. Not because individual American bombs got dramatically more accurate, though they did, but because the cumulative effect became overwhelming. Repeated raids, sustained pressure, targets destroyed, repaired, destroyed again, repaired again, destroyed again until repairs became impossible. One Luftwaffe veteran interviewed in the 1970s summed it up. At first, we thought they couldn't hit anything. By the end, they were hitting everything. We couldn't hide. We couldn't repair fast enough. The Americans just kept coming. That persistence, more than pinpoint accuracy, broke Germany's industrial back. Werner Doring, the pilot who laughed in October 1943, survived the war. He was shot down in April 1944, spent the rest of the war in a POW camp, and returned to Germany after surrender. In a 1962 interview, he reflected on the bombing campaign. We underestimated their ability to learn. In 1943, we thought their precision bombing was a joke. By 1945, they were putting bombs on target consistently. Not perfectly, there's no such thing as perfect in war, but well enough. More than well enough. Asked about the Norden specifically, he said, "We knew they had a sophisticated bombsight. Our intelligence tried to capture one intact for years. But a device is only as good as the system around it. Their early accuracy was poor not because the Norden didn't work, but because they didn't know how to use it effectively. Once they learned tactics, training, experience, the Norden became exactly what they claimed. Not magical. Just very, very good." The story of the Norden Bombsight is ultimately a story about learning, about the gap between theory and practice, about the difference between laboratory conditions and combat conditions, about the brutal education that war provides. The United States entered World War II with a sophisticated piece of technology and absolute confidence in precision bombing doctrine. That confidence shattered against the reality of combat operations over Germany. The technology was good, but not good enough. The doctrine was sound, but incomplete. Lesser institutions might have doubled down on failure, insisting the doctrine was perfect and only execution was lacking. The American military, to its credit, adapted, not quickly. Adaptation took 18 months of brutal losses, but thoroughly. LeMay's tactical innovations, integration of better autopilots, accumulation of experience, achievement of air superiority, lower bombing altitudes, sustained campaigns. All of it combined to transform American bombing from laughable to lethal. The Norden didn't change. The system around it changed. In the end, the Germans stopped laughing not because American bombs suddenly started falling from the sky with GPS precision. They stopped laughing because enough American bombs, falling accurately enough, sustained over sufficient time, backed by overwhelming industrial capacity, achieved the strategic objective: destruction of Germany's ability to wage war. 59% accuracy within 1,000 feet doesn't sound impressive by modern standards. In 1945, against an industrial enemy fighting for survival with crews flying through flak and ice and fear at 25,000 feet, peering through optical sights at targets 6 miles below, it was more than enough. The pickle barrel remained a myth, But the Norden, used by skilled crews within an effective system, proved sufficient to help win the most destructive war in human history. That's the real legacy. Not perfection, not the propaganda claims. Just enough accuracy applied persistently enough to matter. The laughter stopped when the bombs started hitting, and by April 1945 the bombs were hitting more often than not. Mission accomplished.